I was tasked with a daunting task of following these brilliant men who have all shared with you crazy visions of the future. But I know that none of us woke up this morning to this autonomous flying car waiting in our garage and taking us to work seamlessly. So I wanted to first ask you all to take a moment and connect to that place of your morning, and I'm happy to share my morning, to show you the leaps of faith that are necessary, how we need to position ourselves differently as we think about the future. So this morning when I woke up to my alarm on my phone. And as I was picking up my phone to turn it off, I reminded myself that there are 3 billion people that don't have that privilege. And that's, it's billions with a B. And it's not because they necessarily can't afford a phone. It's because even if they could afford one and had one at their arm, they don't have the network to connect them. So it wouldn't really be useful for them. I then had to wake up and make lunch boxes for my kids. And when I was cutting that apple for my daughter, I remembered that on average, when we buy an apple in the store, it was picked 9 months ago. And it probably traveled more miles than the average American does. That's also a problem we need to solve at some point. And then when I had to stick all my kids inside my little electric vehicle and schlep them to their daycares and elementary schools, and I have 4 of those, there's a little moment I save every morning where I curse Waymo for not taking that task off of me. But also, that was something that I needed to do. And so when I got to work, and I work at Alphabet's Moonshot factory at X, the original home of Waymo, I had to wash all of these experiences off of myself. I had to remind myself that I choose every day to be focused on the potential that the future holds, that I need to quiet down that doubting Israeli voice that's often in my head that tells me that people are dreamers and that their creativity has nothing to do with real life, and really think about how I and the rest of my team can help our crazy projects succeed and thrive and grow and change the world for the better. So I'm here to talk to you today about transformational innovation. And transformational innovation is not always necessary. There are a lot of really hard problems that don't require transformational innovation. If I were building a sleep tracking app, that's a super hard thing to do, but those are very well-known innovation curves in minimization, in sensing, in compute. We don't need to start from a blank page when we think about these kind of problems. I want to talk about problems where you do need to do that. What happens if you want to build a car that can drive 500 miles while running on half a gallon of gasoline? There isn't a single internal combustion engine or a single car in the world that would be able to achieve that. You really need to start from scratch when you're thinking about these kind of problems. So what I want to do today is think about strategies that help there. So many of you may know Alan Kay, he's a local figure. He famously said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I love that quote. I would only tweak it slightly and add responsibly. I agree that the only way to predict the future is to invent it, but how you do it is as important as which way you decide to invent it. There are 3 strategies that we apply at work that I think would be useful for anyone who's working in this space. And I wanted to take some time to discuss these with you. These are to fall in love with the problem and not the solution, to focus on the learning that you're getting from the experiments that you're running, and lastly, to touch the real world early and in a meaningful way. So what do I mean when I say fall in love with the problem and not the technology? You can see here 2 versions of previous Waymo vehicles. And perhaps this is a good example to share with you guys. So Waymo didn't start with a bunch of people sitting in a garage and saying, wouldn't it be cool if cars drove themselves? Waymo started with a group of people that were very, very focused on how to solve car injuries. How do you prevent road injuries? And when they looked at all the data, their analysis showed that 95% of the accidents that happen today happen because of human error. And it's not because we're all bad drivers. Some of us are bad drivers. It's mostly because when we go into our car, we don't leave our mood outside of the car. Our kids might be screaming in the back and we need to tend to them. There might be a baby that needs their pacifier. We may be on a phone call where we really need to focus on what's being said because we're negotiating this big deal. All of these reasons divert our attention, our focus, and prevent us from really being on task when we drive. When they had all this analysis, they decided that the best way to solve this problem is basically to take the driver out of the equation. And their original goal was to develop a technology that would allow vehicles to drive 80% of the time autonomously. And I'm taking you back to 2008. So at the time, this was revolutionary. This was unheard of, and it really did sound like science fiction. 3-4 years later, they had a prototype that was safe enough for our people, Xers, to take home, and sort of dog food is what we call it. And everyone who was willing to take the vehicle home had to go through a 2 or 3 hour training and really understand what that means. And we were all instructed to keep our hands on the 10 and the 2. You know the drill. And we were also all aware that the driver's cabin was fitted with video cameras. So the control center back in our office would, at any given moment, be able to see what's going on in the car. And that experiment was a revolutionary moment for our team because it turned out that even our own people very quickly started misusing the technology. You would see people eat, shave, put on makeup, watch YouTube videos. Now, that's not because these employees were trying to fool around. It's because the first time you use a novel technology, you're all sort of uncomfortably excited to sit in that car. But if that technology really works well, by the 3rd, 4th, 5th time, it kind of wears off. You're not as excited, you're certainly not uncomfortable, and quite frankly, you'd rather use that hour commute to do something productive. That really scared the driverless car team. There was a crisis moment, everyone convened together, a group of the founding parties started arguing that the project needed to be shut down. That in fact, not only would it not make roads safer, it might make them more dangerous. Another group on that team was forcefully arguing to rethink the goals, rethink the strategy, rethink the technology. And in living true in that moment to this statement, to falling in love with the problem and not the solution, the end result for that team was to divert their goals, rewrite a whole new work plan, change how they measure their success, and transition to a model where the cars would be fully autonomous. And their goal was now stated as a car that doesn't have a steering wheel. It doesn't have a gas pedal. Where people would just sit in a cabin that would move autonomously. That moment, and here you can see sort of our 360 system and how it ended up, that moment of committing to the additional 20% took them back years from the market. Because as you all know, the last 20% take as long, if not longer, than the previous 80%. But because they remained true to what their original mission was, fast forward 4 more years, here they are trying to see first fruit, already selling in Arizona and getting ready to launch in California. The second strategy that we apply every day is to focus on the learning. And the best example that I use here is, if you're going to teach a monkey to recite Shakespeare while standing on a pedestal, let's not start with building the pedestal. Anyone can build a pedestal. Let's start with finding a monkey that can recite Shakespeare, and if you can't do that, then that was your monkey, and you should probably kill the project. So with that state of mind, we often ask our teams, what is your monkey? What is the monkey you're now working on? An interesting story here is Loon. Loon is another daughter company of ours. Loon started off by focusing on how do you connect the 3 billion people that are not connected today and who live and work in areas where traditional telcos would never put a network. It's just not economically viable for them. And the result that they came back with was, what if we flew stratospheric balloons? So they had this crazy idea of building these huge balloons that would fly to the stratosphere. The stratosphere, for those of you who don't know, is this unloved layer of the atmosphere where nothing really has ever flown, so we had no information about it either. And we didn't even know if we could get those balloons up to the stratosphere. But if we could get them up there and we could navigate them, what if it then sort of connected through LTE reception to the handheld devices that people could buy and connect them this way, making the telco network just unnecessary. When they first started, their first question was, how do they even get to the stratosphere? Like, how do you get to 20 kilometers above you? And we didn't even know if we could do that, and they started prototyping. 60 prototypes later, many of which were built from garbage bags, I'll give them that. They did manage to do it, but when they got there, the balloon just flew away. And the team sort of discovered the hard way that there are air currents in the stratosphere, even though we weren't aware of it, and now they needed to figure out a way of navigating them. So that process of breaking this huge problem into smaller steps and focusing on very specific learnings. Can you get there? What happens once you do? If it flies, how do you navigate? That allowed them to pace their journey and get from here to this, to this. Oh, the video is really much faster on my laptop. There's a moonshot. To this. And just to give you a frame of reference, the balloon that you're seeing in the picture here is our most recent version. It has the footprint of something around the size of a tennis court, and it's as tall as a 7-story building. But when they started, they didn't start with that, right? You saw that they started with a balloon that was roughly the size of a person. That philosophy of starting with focusing on bite-sized learnings and taking it from there based on what you learned, that helped them through this 8-year journey that I flipped through in 4 slides. The last lesson, which we try to apply as often as possible, is to really touch reality early. Speak with people outside the building. If you're an entrepreneur that's worried about how to feed 9 billion people, speak with farmers that are focused about how to feed 7 billion people today. They know a lot about this, and they can teach you about it. If you are convinced that the solution to climate change is grid-level storage, go speak with the battery industry. Experienced people from the battery industry have probably forgotten in the last hour more than you will learn in 6 months of desk research. That lesson is something that we learned the hard way, because while we're the home of Loon and Waymo, we're also the home of many failures. One of the biggest challenges we had was with a project called Glass, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And if we had implemented this lesson early on, if we had gone to the public early on and asked them to try the product, we would have learned very quickly that people aren't interested in wearing a computer on their eye. Corporations were very interested in that for many other reasons, and we would have launched it as a B2B service rather than some consumer product, which ended up failing in the market, and then requiring long cycles of adapting, rethinking, rewinding to be fixed. So that's the other lesson. Be humble and presume that others can teach you about the space that you want to master. So with these 3 lessons, I wanted to end with Eleanor Roosevelt's quote. This is my favorite quote. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And all of us sitting in the room have our dreams and are committed to the projects that we're working on. These projects will eventually make humanity better, make the world more sustainable, leave a better world for our kids. If we all did that, humbly and responsibly, we'll all be better for it. Thank you.